Welcome to the ConTejas Code Podcast, where we dive deep into code, learn practical skills, celebrate the beauty of engineering, and eliminate imposter syndrome. I am Tejas Kumar, and I've been building on the web for over 20 years at places like Vercel, Spotify, Zeta, and more. Today, my guest is Alexander Lichter, a content creator and industry expert on Vue.js and Nuxt. In our discussion, we talk exactly about that. And part of the reason we do that is because a lot of people build user interfaces for applications today, and oftentimes React is very popular. It's so popular that I wrote a book about it. In our discussion today, we hear from the other side, right? Or other sides, because it is a complementary game. There's many different ways to build user interfaces, and Vue.js and Nuxt are one such way. Now, I'm a complete noob in this. I don't really know anything really about Vue and Nuxt, and you may be in that boat. You may think, is there hype that I'm missing out on? How does it work internally, etc.? And Alex is the best person to have this discussion with. Indeed, he gives us so much insight into the state of Vue.js and the Nuxt community. Specifically, we talk about various ways you can write Vue components, like the options API, or writing them as JSX-style single file components. And we also talk about upcoming features in Nuxt 4, which is still pending. But I'll tell you this, Nuxt as a framework for building user interfaces for the web and maybe native, has what I consider the best developer experience I've ever seen. There's a video floating around on the internet somewhere of me reacting to a demo from Daniel Rowe, another, actually the maintainer of Nuxt, and it's incredible. Really, every other framework has a lot to learn from Nuxt, including you. And so if you'd like to learn from that or anything about Vue.js, this is the episode for you. Now, I'd like to offer this to all of you at no cost, because this is really separate to my day job. And the way we can do that and make it sustainable is through sponsors. So let's take a moment to acknowledge the podcast sponsors. And if you want to sponsor the podcast as well, reach out to me on X at TejasKumar_. We'll make something happen. The ConTejas Code podcast is partnered with Code Crafters. Code Crafters teaches you how to code in a really great way that makes it clear, makes you better at your programming language of choice, but also the tools you use as a developer or you want to use as a developer. So tools like Redis or Docker or Git, Code Crafters will teach you how to implement those tools, like recreate them from scratch in a language that you choose, like JavaScript or Python, so you get better at both. It's a really great way to learn, and they have a great free tier. But if you want to pay, you can get up to 40% off using the link in the show notes. That's tej.as/codecrafters. The podcast is free, but it's run by sponsors or is crowdfunded. So if you want to talk about any of that, shoot me a DM. We'll make that happen. Thanks so much for sticking around. Now for my discussion with Alexander Lichter. Alexander Lichter, welcome.
Hey Tejas, nice to be here. Thank you for having me on the show. How are you doing?
I'm doing well, thank you. Yeah, it's been a long time coming, man. We were together at CityJS Berlin like November last year, so I'm really excited to chat today.
Yeah, same. I remember, I saw your talk. It was late in the evening. And I really loved the vibe and also all the talks we had, all the joking around. So yeah, super happy to be on the podcast and talk about one of the most amazing frameworks out there in the world. Some people might disagree with me, but that's my take on it. So yeah.
Are you talking about Vue or Nuxt?
Well, that's a fair question. I would say both. Like Vue in its component level, framework level, and then meta framework wise, I really think Nuxt has some very special features. Not many other frameworks have, or even say no other big meta framework has. But I guess we'll come to that in a bit.
Yeah, I'm super excited. Let's start by having you do a little bit of an introduction to yourself and everything. I mean, you've got this phenomenal YouTube channel and you do talks at conferences and you have a podcast. So where do you come from? What is it that you do these days? And then we can get into the details of Vue, Nuxt, and more.
That sounds great. Yeah, you mentioned big parts already. So by profession, so to say, I do web engineering consultancy, like a one-man show, so to say. And I'm part of the Vue community. I'm part of the Nuxt team. And then I started with content creation almost a year ago, end of September last year, because I remember when I started, I looked through source code a lot of lots of libraries and frameworks and of course the docs, but I really missed some content that helps me digging some more advanced features. And my goal was to basically create exactly that, the content that I would have loved to see back then when I started with a framework like Nuxt or with Vue, or also some things I don't know, okay, you have a dependency, there's a PR, it's not merged yet, and how do you get that locally without just copy pasting the code? All these things that developers would need in the everyday life, but they might not know how because, well, nobody knows everything. So that's how I started with content creation, and then the podcast DejaVue came to it. I talked also in November, actually, a little bit after CityJS. I went to Toronto, to Vue Toronto, and there I met with my now co-host Michael Thiessen, and we were talking. And there were quite some Vue podcasts earlier on, like there was Views on Vue that doesn't exist anymore, Enjoy the Vue, and also the Vue News podcast. So they were on, but they all went on hiatus at some point. So we're like, okay, there's a gap. We have a few things to talk about. We know some speakers, some guests. So why not just starting it? We tried a little bit from November on, and we started in April then with the podcast when we felt like, okay, this has some structure. We have some ideas what we want to talk about and have some guests. Sometimes just the two of us, sometimes one of us with a guest. And we even had 4 people on recently. So yeah, lots of fun and really, really good conversations like this one as well.
I love those names of the podcasts you mentioned, like Enjoy the View. It's
So
a name
good.
that lends itself well to puns, and I love it. You mentioned, so the whole like genesis of your YouTube channel and your content was, you wanted some more advanced, practical day-to-day content, and you didn't find it. So you're like, hey, there's a gap. I want to fill it by making content. Why do you think that didn't exist? Was it that Vue wasn't used at scale to the level where people were facing the problems you were facing? Or was it more that as engineers, we just solve problems, open pull requests, get things shipped, and then forget about it? We don't think about, like, let's now teach this to someone else so that they can get better. I mean, we do think about it in the context of open source, right? We'll probably
Yes.
make libraries to solve problems. But when it comes to communicating over content, I agree. I think engineers tend to sort of not do that. Was this, do you think, why there was such a gap that you wanted to fill?
I think you have this problem in a way naturally of like, okay, it doesn't matter even which framework we're talking about. I think like the thing, beginner content is something you can easily produce even if you don't have like a lot of years experience with a framework, because like, okay, you can build something, you can show people, okay, this is how, I don't know, React works, this is how Vue works, a bit of reactivity, here are some React hooks, for example, this and that. So I think this is something you can produce without like putting that much effort into. And there are lots of beginners out there who want to get into a framework like React or Vue or Svelte and so on. So in a way, like if you want the best like ROI, so to say, this is a very good way of saying, okay, beginner content out there, like here's a project I want to build with Tailwind and Next.js, for example, or like Tailwind and Nuxt as well. And it gets lots of views, of course. The problem is with more advanced content, it takes more time first to understand, then to find a way to explain it as well, like the setup around it. And also the audience is smaller and smaller because they're like, okay, there are lots of beginners, like, okay, they're fine. But for more advanced content, it's like, okay, do I even have that issue in my project? Do I even need to know about a certain feature? So in a way, it's really tricky to find a good spot of like, okay, I have an audience of people who are interested in advanced content, and then also have the time to do it consistently, because this was also one of the things when I started. I wanted to make sure, okay, I want to do it on a consistent base, which is like once a week a video, and also now once a week a podcast episode. And consistency with very advanced topics is also tricky. It's always difficult with everything, but especially with like, okay, then I have to prep this setup, and I don't want to spend 30 minutes explaining I did this and this and that, and now we can explain 10 minutes what issue we solve. Ideally, you have a bit like, it should be more tangible for people as well. So it's, I think in general, like intermediate and advanced content in any kind of context is more rare just because of that.
Yeah, and I feel like such a almost like content bond with you here, because that's why this podcast exists, right? Like I think the listeners know well, this podcast came out from just frustration of doing 25-minute conference talks where I'm like, but I have so much more to say. I want to give you more meat than bones. And so that's why some of the solo episodes of this podcast are deep dives, and even with guests. So I definitely hear that. And indeed, like we don't have millions of listeners yet, but I think
Getting
the market
there.
is just super small. There's like, who's going to care that much about the details? In any case, that's awesome. I think that's a great thing you're doing, and I need to say that publicly, because like there needs to be content for cases more than just reading the README on video, right? And I think that's really cool and valuable that you do that. Why Vue? And we talked about this a little bit before recording, but React is the easy thing. It's the biggest thing. I've been active in React since 2014, so 10 years now.
Congrats to that.
Thank you. Yeah, I have written some Vue. There's a chapter about Vue in my React book, so I played with it. But in terms of like using it every day in production grade workloads, either on a job or something, it often just doesn't come to mind, mainly because I'm more familiar with React. But I'm curious, like, why did you choose Vue? How did you get started in Vue? For someone listening today who maybe gets the chance to start a greenfield project at work, why should they choose Vue?
Very good point. So first of all, thank you for the shout out, and also back to you. Thanks for making the podcast. Also like to bring on all these different guests from like the different angles, different places of the world, and different positions. It's super interesting. I listened to quite some episodes, so shout out back to you straight away. And yeah, why Vue? Like maybe let's tell how I started getting into it, because like many others, I didn't start with JavaScript. Like nowadays, probably lots of people like, okay, bootcamp, JavaScript, full stack, here we go. But I started like, I would say, I founded my own company in 2015 after my A-levels, like right after. And I was a bit into programming already. I had a bit of Java experience, a bit of PHP. And then I did a lot of things with Laravel, right? Amazing framework, still like doing super well.
Do you have a Lamborghini yet?
No, unfortunately not, because I stopped using it mostly. So too bad. I wish. No. But so I used Laravel a lot, and then one of the reasons why Vue grew a lot in popularity was because of Taylor Otwell, the founder and like creator of Laravel, because he tweeted like, oh, he wanted to learn React, seemed too complicated. He tried this and it's amazing, and he pointed at Vue.
Wow.
So that was like, yeah, there's so much fun that like, okay, if the creator of the framework says that's easier and it works well, why not? And lots of people in the Laravel community also like jumped on the bandwagon, like trying it out. And it's true, like Vue 2, it was super easy to use, especially if you're not really a JavaScript developer or like a front-end developer by profession, because I definitely wasn't. And then I also tried it out and I used it with Laravel together. And at some point it's like, okay, I want to do more in the front end, and oh cool, modals and routing. And at some point you're like, okay, the backend does the routing, the front end also does a bit of a routing. And yeah, it's like basically back in front fighting a little bit about the responsibilities. And also like, okay, you have to do certain things twice and what to do with the data. So I thought, okay, why not using Vue fully as a front end, Laravel only as an API? And I did, and it was a lot of fun. And I think why I really get stuck with Vue eventually is like, okay, I knew JavaScript, like I did jQuery before, was of course pain, but that's how things worked back then. Like I knew HTML and CSS, and that worked well. I knew like open source from Laravel also before, so it seemed natural to me with HTML, CSS, and JavaScript and Vue, where you have like these single file components, and you have like your script part, whereas your business logic, your JavaScript, your template part, whereas like HTML and a little bit of directives, like an Angular, where like it's a DSL in a way. Like, yeah, okay, you don't have like JSX, though you can also use it with Vue, but it's not that common. And you have your style part, where you say like, this component can be styled in a certain way, and if you want to, these styles can also only influence that certain component, a bit like style components, but just baked in. So if you know HTML, JavaScript, and CSS, you're good to go with Vue. You just need a little bit on top of it. And also reactivity was very, very easy because it was just by default. So it just stuck with me very, very easy. And I hear that a lot now from people like, okay, getting into it, it's not that complicated, especially if you don't have any previous framework knowledge, it's not a big deal. If you have, then of course it's even easier because you know certain concepts.
This is the best explanation for so many. This is the best answer to not just the why Vue question, but so many questions I've had coming into this. and really for years, right? Because like I always thought that something was wrong with me in a sense. Like why don't I get Vue? Like I've written it. I actually have or had recently some Vue in production on a website. Yeah, it was just a contact form. I just wanted to play with it.
Still, but that counts.
But I was like, why does this not hit the same? And your answer is so profound, right? Because you come from a non-JavaScript background. Taylor Otwell comes from a PHP background. Exactly. And now I think of a friend of mine. He has a startup where they're like sort of disrupting the medical record space. And same thing, it's a Symfony application, so not Laravel, so PHP framework still. And the front end part is Vue. And I asked him why Vue. He's like, I don't know, it just clicked. And so what I'm hearing is like React is, quote unquote, just JavaScript. It's just a bunch of functions with now a runtime. But it's just functions. So for me, I knew JavaScript from a very young age. And this is why I guess React clicked. But it's interesting, this idea that for those who aren't familiar with JavaScript, initially, Vue seems to be the way to go. I've never heard that before, but it explains a lot.
I hear the sentiment a lot of people, like especially backend engineers, as you mentioned, like, okay, I can use Vue, especially with the options API. It's so easy. You don't have to think much, where to put things, because like, okay, you have your data for your state, you have props for properties, you have your computer for computer properties based on like other state of the application, and so on, so on. So it's really easy for them to get into it. Of course, now Vue also has the composition API. We'll come to that a bit later, I guess, because that also changed a few things up. But yeah, it makes a lot of sense. And another thing that Vue, in my opinion, does well is the level of being opinionated. Because if you have something like React, it's like, as you said, it's just JavaScript. You can choose what you want for state management, what router you want, and so on, so on. So you have a lot of choice, but in a way that also makes it a bit tricky to like, first of all, there's no one React application. It can look so different no matter which project you get into. Like, oh, do they use MobX, for example? And lots of projects may not. Are they maybe also still are they already on hooks, or maybe still use class components, and so on, so on. But okay, that many frameworks have, right? But on the other hand, if you have like the spectrum of like not really opinionated, you can choose whatever you want. There's React and there's Angular saying, oh, we have a way for everything. We have a very clear structure. We follow that along and we'll guide you with everything, but you have to do it our way. Otherwise, it will be very, very difficult. And I would say Vue is in the middle, because there is some opinionatedness about reactivity, for example, how that works. Of course, there are also some things that are not built in. Like, for example, Vue has no native fetch library built in, right? I mean, now we have the fetch API. Back then, Axios was the choice. But if someone wanted to use something else, that's not a problem. While in Angular, you have something like HTTP client. And that's, I think, the level of opinionatedness of like, okay, you have a lot of freedom, but also you have one tool for state management, which is Pina. You have like one router. You have often one way of doing things that still makes it easier for people to get used to it and then still have some degree of freedom.
Interesting. Yeah, and I agree with you. I think with React, the problem is too much freedom. And Vue, I wonder, do you even need to know concepts like routing with Vue? Or do you just use the Vue router and then, it helps you along the way?
I would say you don't necessarily, especially if you use Vue, and now we get to yet another point. If you use Vue just as progressive enhancement, like you have a server in the application and not like as Next.js is doing it, but like a PHP, Django, Java, whatever server and application, just Vue is like, okay, do a bit of interactivity, transitions, modals, whatever. You don't even need a router, right? You can just use Vue, you can insert it, and also you can just use it with a script tag. You don't even need a build step in theory. So it's really easy to get started. If you say like, okay, I need routing, then you can check out the Vue router, you can add it, you can read into concept like routing, how to use it. But if you start with it, you don't even need it, no.
Interesting. That's so cool. Okay, so what I'm hearing is Vue is just highly accessible to people who maybe have no background in JavaScript or even web development. And if somebody gets into Vue from the beginning, that's the choice always for the UI layer. Interesting. You mentioned a bunch of APIs earlier, composition API, props API, et cetera, et cetera. What do those mean and what do they do? And I'm asking on behalf of all the people who just aren't super familiar with Vue.
Yes.
Because like with React, there are some APIs. There's the context API. There's state APIs like useReducer, et cetera. But maybe even the word API here means something different. So assuming assuming no Vue knowledge at all, what does that mean?
So basically, if we take the single file components like that, you have a .vue file where you write your code, right? And then you have, as I mentioned before, the script, the template, and the style part. Then in the script part, there are two, even three, but more or less two different ways of writing logic in there and like defining what the logic of your component looks like. Vue started with the so-called options API. So you had like an export default, and then you had an object in there. And in the object, you had like top-level keys, the certain options. And there you had, for example, data, which would be a function. And there you return an object to create your state. And you can also have props to say, okay, there's a props object saying, okay, my prop could be number. And then you say, okay, should it be required? Should there be a default? And a type, as in like primitive JavaScript type or like array or object. So TypeScript support for options API was a bit tricky, but it got better. Still, there were a few issues with that. First, as I mentioned, it's really easy because if you wonder where to put something, you have these like 5-6 top-level options, and you know where to write it. Like it doesn't take much energy to figure out, okay, where to put it. And also architecture-wise, every component looks the same. So you feel really at home, so to say. The problem is well, a few things. And you might notice from React and mixins as well, because Vue also had mixins to say like, okay, let's write a partial component in share logic. And it was a pain because to access things like props or data in your component, you wrote this dot and whatever. For example, this dot number to access the prop number. Now, if you have 3, 4 mixins that are part of a component, you don't know where the number comes from. And maybe there are even 2 mixins with the same name, maybe data, maybe a computer property, and they clash. Yeah, and it's a giant mess. So
Interesting.
I think for more advanced architecture, the options API really had some shortcomings. And the biggest one as well, as I mentioned, TypeScript support, because you had this magic this, and it worked very well because Vue hacked its reactivity system because everything was reactive by default by using object like the getters and setters and like hijacks them more or less because proxies were not available on IE. So Vue 3 is doing that now, but Vue 2 didn't.
Okay, so the options API and the what's the single file component API called?
No, basically it's the options API. Like this is how you write the component, like in a single file component in the script part. That's the old one.
Do single file components replace the options API?
No. So basically single file components is a concept as, okay, you have this Vue file and in the script part, you can use either the options API or what's the more modern and future way, the composition API.
Oh,
the good part
that's
is,
what I wanted to know. Yeah.
yes,
Sorry.
the good part is also your style and your template part. They stay literally the same. Nothing changes there. It's only about the logic part.
Okay.
Yeah.
So there's the options API, which it sounds legacy because it has these shortcomings. It doesn't have TypeScript support, it has magical this, and there's now the composition API.
Exactly.
How is that different? So in your script block, again, let me just say back to you for the listeners who are new to single file components in Vue, for people experienced with Astro, this is maybe closer, right? Because in Astro, you have a code fence with your JavaScript and then your template underneath. So with Vue, you have a script tag that represents the interactive logic side. You have a template HTML tag, and inside this tag, you have your actual template, and you have a style tag. And inside the style tag is your CSS. Now, in the script tag, you would either use the composition API or the options API. The options API is a legacy API because it has some shortcomings. What is the composition API? How does it differ from the options API?
Yeah, so it's pretty much different because the idea was like we talked with Evan about it also on the DejaVue podcast. It was really amazing to see like, okay, why even options API? Because the shortcomings, as I mentioned, sharing logic, right? The magical this and TypeScript support. And TypeScript support was the biggest thing. So the idea was let's remove this part and make it a bit more JavaScript-like. Which also means, okay, we have to like there is no, let's say, magic reactivity. So now you can define things in your script tag that are just constants, like just variables, nothing magical, just plain old JavaScript variables. And what's happening now is there is the composition API introduced a new function called the setup function. So you shouldn't, but you could even mix the composition API and the options API by just saying, okay, you have these top level options. Let's add a setup function in there. It's just called setup, like same like data. And in there, now you write everything. So it's not separated by like computed or data or props. In the setup function, you do everything. The problem with this is, and it's not common to do this with the setup functions, maybe for migration, but even then, we go one step further in a second. But there you write all logic, and then you return in the setup function what the template has access to.
Wait, so let me say this back to you.
Yes.
So the composition API, you just have a function. You export a function, or you declare a function called setup, and you can do whatever you want in there. I'm assuming this function is async, so you could even fetch data maybe.
You can make it async, yeah, with suspense and everything, exactly. Yeah.
Great, and then you just return props. Is that what you return? You return an object that the template has access to, or what do you return from there?
Yeah, exactly. You return an object that the template has access to, but it's not props in that way. It's more like this should be used in template. But the important thing there is it's like this was very early when the composition API was out, and at some point, of course, like lots of realizations, like, okay, it's lengthy because you don't want to return all the things in there necessarily. And it wasn't as elegant as it could be. So what we do nowadays, because Vue has a compiler, right? If you use the build step and not just the script import, just like with CDN, then you have a build step, you have a compiler. And then we use something called the script setup syntax. So instead of just your script block, maybe lang equals TS if you want TypeScript, you now have script setup. So the idea is everything in that block will be then by the compiler transformed in the setup function into such a setup function that I just mentioned. So what you will do is you don't have to return anything because the compiler can figure out, okay, this is what we have. This should all be used in template. It's fine. We just do it. So the Vue compiler will basically do the heavy lifting and your code will really shrink down and be very concise. The problem is, I remember when the composition API came out, lots of people looked at it when the script setup thing was not available yet. So we're like, okay, this is such a move backwards. It's so difficult. And I agree. I understand. But with the script setup syntax, it's very elegant, it's short, and it's easy.
How do you expose props on a component now? Do you still have to use the legacy API for that? Or can the setup function return something that says this component accepts these props?
So in the setup function itself, not. That's also a good thing of the script setup part, because what you use there is a compiler macro called define props. So also have define emits for events, because like, okay, props down, events up to communicate with parent components and child components. So you basically write define props, and there you either define your props in TypeScript and they will be converted so Vue understands it, or you define them with the Vue syntax from before and the compiler will do the heavy work and you can just use them in there. So you can say const props equals define props and then use them in your code, in your script part if you want to.
Okay, so it's just a macro. How debuggable is this? Because every time there's a compiler and there's quote unquote magic, I know developers have like alarm bells going like, oh my gosh, now if something's broken, I'm going to have a really difficult debugging experience because the compiler is going to output a lot of code that maybe I can't read or I can't parse unless I have source maps, and the complexity grows very quickly. So what's the debugging experience like if something gets messed up here?
So the good part is with source maps, yeah, it's pretty easy. And even if you have like a Vue project, there is a Vue playground. We can also link that in the show notes. And there you have even the compiler output on the right side. So like, okay, this will be merged into like plain JavaScript, because also the .vue file also has to go into plain JavaScript at some point. And this is what it is. The good part in my time using Vue, and I use it quite excessively, of course, I rarely had to debug the compiler output, because either there's a very good error message or there's TypeScript saying, hey, wait, you missed the .value, and we'll come to that in reactivity also in a bit. So it's more about the own logic or also the reactivity. That's something that you rather want to debug. But also for reactivity, it's really good because Vue has ways of saying, okay, when is a certain variable used as a reactive dependency, or when it's like a certain watcher, for example, is triggered, then you can use a debugger and say, okay, why got it triggered, what happened, and how things are related to each other.
And this is presented. How is this presented? The debugger, it's probably a DevTools like a Chrome extension that has DevTools.
Just the debugger keyword. You can just like write debugger, okay, and then you're good. But yeah, you also have the Vue DevTools, either as Chrome extension or also external. And there's also work on that to make it a part of the application, like the Nuxt DevTools, which maybe also some people not using Nuxt or Vue know, because they did quite some buzz on social media. So it's like we have lots of debugging options, and I still think the most things to debug is your own logic or really something like reactivity.
I see. Awesome. That sounds really approachable. And I feel confident now that I could maybe build something more sophisticated with Vue. You mentioned suspense. How would that work? Is it just like React where there's a suspense component and I like put a Vue component in between some type of boundary, or is there more to it?
So yeah, there is a suspense component. Suspense is right now not stable. It's still experimental. It has been like that for a while. And also Evan said that will happen like around end of the year or like 2024 will be more stable. But now it's more like writing an RFC, making sure that the idea of the Vue core team aligns with the community. Because if not, well, we've seen in React how that went with also changes that were changed back, which totally makes sense, right? Like reversing these changes and be like, okay, look, framework authors maybe had a different idea of like than the regular core team. It was a really good choice. But you have a suspense component. Coming back to that, you can put a Vue component in between. You have a fallback if you want to like say, okay, load this until the component is loaded. It can be async, but also there are other ways of dealing with async state in Vue. So you could also just say, okay, load the component itself. Don't make it async at all. And then, because everything is reactive, right? Just like change after you fetch the value, just change it and then have a computed property that does something, or like just use it in a template and will be automatically updated.
Computed properties. Is this something you also have a macro to define in the setup function, or how do you let a component know that this is supposed to be a computed property?
Yeah, maybe that's a good point to talk about reactivity in general, because in Vue 2, everything was just reactive, right? And in Vue 3, that's not the case. And you have two ways of defining reactivity primitive, so to say. So you have something called reactive, and these are actual functions that you import from Vue. And the other thing is ref. So reactive is also used under the hood by Ref. So that's always the interesting part. And it only works with objects or with arrays, but not with like primitive data types like a string or a number, just because JavaScript is treating them different when it comes to copying, right? Copy by reference, copy by value. We know about that, I suppose. So based on that, like reactive is in lots of opinions, also the Vue docs by now, is not the preferred way. It can still be useful to say, okay, if I have form state, then I just wrap it in reactive and things will be reactive and it's great. The problem is, as I just mentioned, okay, it only works with objects and arrays, and there is no indication that a thing is reactive. It magically works, but it's not like there is a different TypeScript type for that. It's very different to ref, because ref, short for reactive reference, the idea is there, you can wrap anything, can be an object, can be a number, a string, whatsoever. And the return value, so you write like something like ref and then ref 0, for example, in parentheses, so like a function call. Then you say const count equals ref in parentheses 0. And this count you can use in a template, and whenever you would update that count, it would be just magically working. In the template, that's all fine. But if you need it in the code, you have to use .value to access the value of the ref.
That's because it's a proxy.
Exactly, it's a proxy, and it's also wrapped. So if you use a number, then you have to work with that object, with the proxy, correct. So then if you have a function like increment, then we just run count.value plus plus, or count.value plus equals 1, or however you want it.
So this sounds like Vue's implementation of signals, really.
Correct.
Because you've got, okay, I'm glad I'm tracking that. This is interesting, but I have to ask if we can go a little bit deeper on why reactive doesn't support scalar types, so strings and numbers, etc. And so just for the listeners, I will explain copy by reference or by value.
That's a good idea. Yeah.
But like, and then I want to understand this a little bit more. So for those listening who aren't so familiar with this, when you have an object or an array and you assign it to a variable, say X in JavaScript, JavaScript stores a reference to that object in memory in the variable, right? And correct me if I'm wrong, but if you assign a variable, say Y, to a string that's like double quotes Alexander, that string is stored as a value in memory, not as a pointer to the value, not as a reference to the value, but just the value itself. And this way, strings are really immutable, right? Like when you change a string, you create a new string and store that in memory, as opposed to pointing to an existing reference. And the reason this is important is because if you say assign variable X to an object, and then later you mutate that object, you say X dot key equals something, then you change the original object that the variable references, right? So anyway, I hope that's not too confusing for people, but now that we've established this by reference or by value, what limitation is there with reactive that says it doesn't work with scalar types?
So it's not that much of a limitation. It's more of like an API designed. So like, okay, this like data, for example, out of Vue 2, or at some point it was called Vue.observable as like an own API, but that's not many people know about that. I also forgot about it in the meantime. So that also always like say, okay, we have to return an object because of the mentioned limitation. If you want to use something like a number, a string, a scalar type in general, Boolean as well, then you use ref, because then you don't have the problem of like, okay, how to handle that copy by reference, copy by value. It's more or less an abstraction around it to say, okay, we can deal with it. And as I mentioned, ref uses reactive under the hood, because if you say you have reactive, you have an object in there, and the key is value, and the value is just your value, it's almost like a ref. Right. So in a way, it's more like a more lower level API. And the big difference, as I mentioned before, with ref is that you can pass the ref around. And you said already signals, which is a really good point, because before signals got like a big thing and hype, like Vue had it already, but we didn't call it signals. It was not that explicit. It, let's say, just worked. It was tracking based reactivity without naming it not necessarily.
Okay. And so the reason, sorry to interrupt you.
Sure.
The reason reactive doesn't work with strings is because you just can't add proxies on strings. You need like, an object.
Yeah, especially if you like copied reference, then like you can't copy the reference exactly. Then you copy the string itself, and then reactivity wouldn't work.
Got it. Thank you.
Correct. No problem. And signals often, I mean, I know, for example, solid signals, preact signals, and so on. The difference between them and ref, for example, is that ref by default is deeply nested reactive. So if you have an object with like A and an object there, B, an object, so you do like ref, like, I don't know, object.value.a.b.c equals 1, that will work. It will update. So
will that update what? Okay, this is a great. But what will update there? Will the root object update, or will the C property of the nested object update?
So if you do like object.value.a.b.c equals 1, then like everything watching or like everything depending on that object ref, that will update.
Right. Okay, so the whole object. So it's not fine-grained reactivity to the level of.
It is to a certain level fine-grained because like it's also a bit tricky. Maybe there, let's say if you don't want it at all because performance, there's something called shallow ref, and that's, I think, the closest thing you get to signals, because that's, if you replace the object, then it will be updated. Otherwise, it won't.
Yeah.
Or for the ref itself, you can have a watcher on let's say that object, and this watcher can have a configuration saying deep, true or false. And depending on if it's true or false, then the watcher might fire if object.value.a.b.c updates, or if object.value.a updates, then it will fire either way, because then it's a top level update.
Got it.
So also there, it depends a bit how you do reactivity. Same with, we have something called watch effect as well. So also there, if you use object.value.a.b.c there, no problem. If you just use object.value, won't work.
Interesting. This is really, really cool. I must say, like, I must take an aside here and just appreciate how deeply you know this stuff. It's so cool to watch you like confidently talk about this. Okay, so Vue's reactivity model is very similar to the zeitgeist. Solid, Astro not, but Solid, Svelte has runes, Angular has signals.
Svelte 5 has runes, yeah.
Everything except React. I like that. I like that there's a convergence there. How does like Vue.js maintain its popularity among developers? Because like there's React, which a lot of people say React is losing popularity. I don't think that's true, honestly. Just look at the numbers, right? If anything, Next.js you could say React is losing popularity because it's hiding behind Next.js, and Next.js is gaining popularity. If you look at like the big picture, but there's also rising stars like Solid.js and Quick. They're like growing a lot, and so it's a very hot space still. How does Vue maintain its image and popularity among developers, despite all of the newer upcoming things like Svelte and Solid and Quick?
Happy to answer the question in a second. With the terms of, I think when we come back to React, I don't think it's like, maybe it loses popularity as in, if I have a new project, would it be my framework of choice? But to be honest, this is usually not how decisions go, right? You're not like, okay, React is fine, but I like Quick a lot, so let's do our new project in Quick. There are so many decisions to make, and I understand why lots of people pick React, even though I think Vue, or also something like Svelte, for example, could be an equally good choice. Because what is out there that like makes React different, except, okay, you have a quote unquote better as in like broader job market, so more people knowing React. And maybe that's one more thing, an ecosystem in terms of libraries. But also there, Svelte and Vue as well, I think they also got quite mature in a good set of libraries. Of course, we don't have, I don't know, Shatsy. And we have Shatsy and Vue, we have Radix Vue as well. So we have ports of that, or like Next.off becoming off.js and more framework agnostic. So I think in a way, while React is losing popularity, it's still a popular choice for project just because it's too big to fail, so to say. And it's a no-brainer. Like, okay, we need more people, no problem. Most of our people know React anyway, most of the times. But I think it doesn't, like, if someone says, okay, we want a Vue project because we have a couple developers, they know Vue, we have a couple of developers knowing React, but changing frameworks nowadays is, I would say, it's pretty straightforward if you have the concepts of one. It's more like, okay, they do reactivity different, and Svelte does that different, and React does other things differently. But also more and more, as you said, frameworks will converge in terms of signals, for example, in terms also meta frameworks will do. So I think that boundary will like be reduced less and less, and there will be less and less arguments like, okay, why should we use React and not another framework? Also to Next.js, like in the latest State of JS survey that was very interesting, I think all major frameworks, like meta frameworks, got a big hit in terms of like, okay, I would like and use again or something like that. Or like retention. I remember that everything was going a little bit down. Next.js was going down the most. Not sure why that is exactly. Lots of explanations for that. But eventually still lots of people will use it just because it's proven.
As an N of one, I can tell you my Next.js usage has gone down significantly. I still for context, I used to work at Vercel. I know Next.js intimately. I love Next.js. I think it's the best way to build with React. But my usage of React has gone down significantly. Also,
True.
that's why, and that's because, frankly, I'm comfortable enough with JavaScript to not need like extra abstract. React is a great abstraction on like interactive features for UIs or user interfaces, but I'm comfortable with a script tag, and just like native. And so, with Astro, you don't really need much else. You could literally just include a script tag with your components and they do the work. Or if you
Yeah.
need something more sophisticated, you could use something more lean, like Vue or Solid or what is it? A Quick, right? And
Yeah.
you can use all of them with Astro, like whenever you want. And so for this reason, I've shifted completely from React to Astro and just used Astro with some interactive library for very small things.
Yeah,
So
also like if you need SSR and hydration there for these things as well, that works out of the box. I also think like less JavaScript is a good thing, but I agree. Like ideally, we don't need a huge abstraction around it, and ideally, I would even say we have a lot of things in the language itself. But like one thing that came up, especially like this year, a lot in conferences that I've been around was like web components, and I feel like it's every year. Like, is this the year of web components? I still think there's a bit of a way to go, but even with Lit, for example, it's really nice to build because you have like, okay, you have reactivity, that's great, it works. There are a few pain points like templating. Okay, that's in the native like standard web component, it's a bit tricky, but it got better. So like using a standard makes a lot of sense, but then frameworks offer something that for example web components don't, unfortunately. It's like a comprehensive way of doing a lot of things. Like there are tutorials, there's documentation, there are videos or podcasts about it. It's like, okay, this is the mental model, this is the opinionatedness, and here's how we can do things. There are libraries for that. And I think that's also a big part why people still choose frameworks.
yeah, that's a really great answer, and I can appreciate that there is a convergence. But coming back to the question, how does Vue.js maintain its position?
Good point. So, a little sidetracked here. So first of all, I think still innovating because yeah, Vue.js is 10 years old now, right? Like 10 years of Vue.js was this year's like big motto on conferences, also on Evan the podcast. And the interesting part is that it doesn't really stop. Like the Vue core team, and also disclaimer, I'm part of the Nuxt team, which doesn't mean I'm part of the Vue core team, but of course, I know a few people there, discuss, have some people on the podcast, and also see what's happening there. So Vue 3.5 is an RC right now. It actually happened a couple hours ago. Where things like lazy hydration, which is something that other frameworks already have, but which is something that was also like is needed a lot to like have performance improvements. That comes into the core, for example. Other things that are other frameworks do, for example, good, but also that they fit in the Vue context. And another example of like innovation is Vapor Mode, where it's about Vue is using a virtual DOM. So as an explanation, okay, you have the DOM in the browser, but back in time using an abstraction, so like having a virtual list, and especially for a compiler knowing, okay, certain parts of my components, they will be always static, so I don't have to check if something changed there. That made Vue very fast. Nowadays, of course, browsers caught up a bit, things got faster, and now a more fine-grained approach, one, as you said, like Solid does, with like, okay, we have our template part, and then we have a fine-grained approach of reactivity there, saying, okay, this changes, this might be an effect. We can use reactivity to do it fine-grained. That's under development called Vapor Mode, and that is meant to be first significantly faster, specialized for something like data visualization, right? And will bring quite some improvements. So also there, like the team, the Vue team is not stopping, taking a look around and saying, okay, what works for others, what could also work in our context. Another good example is reactivity transform. This is a feature maybe people not know about at all because it doesn't exist anymore. Vue tried it to implement something around the ref because you always have that dot value. So they tried maybe $ref could work, and then reverting that operation and so on and so on. So make it easier with syntactic and compile sugar, but eventually it split the community even more, and the benefits were not as big as the drawbacks. On the other hand, Svelte now with runes goes more or less in that direction. At least the syntax looks quite familiar, but for them it works better. So it's also interesting to see how frameworks more or less take a look what would work for others, what might work in their community. But for Vue, it's really not stopping to innovate, and also like not let's say not forgetting the roots as well. Like the options API is there to stay, it will not leave. So people using it, and I'm not the biggest fan of it. I used it a lot. I love the composition API nowadays. It's, I think, way better. But for some scenarios, like every component should look the same. In a big team of not people being a front-end developer by profession, it's a blessing. It helps a lot. And that will stay and will still be there and be supported. So that's also an important part.
Interesting. Okay, so you mentioned it stays up, it maintains its popularity by keeping a finger on the pulse, keeping an ear to the ground, and going, what is the state of the industry? How do we, in a way keep up? But how do we innovate? That's your word. There's two kinds of innovation, right? There's de novo, like completely out of nothing, novel innovation, and then there's innovation to keep up. Like for example, we see with the iPhone and the Android race a lot, right? So you can now, as of iOS 18. Place your icons wherever you want on a grid. And Android has had this for literally years, right?
True.
And so Apple would say that's an innovation, but it's keeping up. At the same time, Face ID. Apple just like came out of nowhere and was like, hey, you can use your face to authenticate now. And then everybody, copied that. What is some things that Vue does that is just completely novel? Like what recent innovations have been there that just didn't exist and Vue was like, we're going to introduce this to the ecosystem?
I think like for recent innovation, I would look a level higher because like I think the keeping up part is definitely true. Something like Vapor Mode is like, okay, there is a better way to do things. So let's try it out. Let's see how it fits to the way we do it and adapt it and maybe even get into better situations. Or like, okay, improving performance and memories, but that's not necessarily innovation. It's like, okay, we can do better. I think when it really comes to innovating in terms of like new features, then the meta framework level is a bit more interesting. Just because what you usually need, like Vue is giving a good set of capabilities. Like it's a component level framework, it helps with a lot of things, and there are certain things like the lazy hydration part that can only be done in core in a nice way. But then if you need something like server-side rendering, if you really want to deploy a full-fledged application, I would say usually reach to a meta framework like Nuxt. Interestingly, Vue community, it's not as popular as Next is in the React community. That's something definitely to note down. So lots of people just like, I take Vue. I will check what I need because there are a lot of plugins out there as well that just work together. Like auto imports, for example. That's a feature from Nuxt, but it's also available if you want a Vue project. File system-based routing and so on and so on. So some people just like build their own little meta framework on top of Vue, like not full-fledged, but what they need. But the others go for Nuxt. And I think in Nuxt, there are a lot of things that innovate in terms of the Vue ecosystem, but also in the general one. I mentioned the Nuxt DevTools that came out, for example. It's more a DX focused thing, but it blew the mind across the ecosystem with like, okay,
even mine.
Yeah, perfect. So it's such a nice idea to like, okay, we want basically the developers to fall in love with the framework like we do, right? We want them to enjoy working with it, and that's like it's a whole thing from giving good DX in terms of dev tools, error messages, documentation, and also content around it, right? So, but in terms of innovations, Nuxt has server components. It's not like, okay, we're the first having server components, but that's also not the point. It's more like how they implement it, how they work. Also, they're still experimental, but that's a thing for sure. We handle like third-party assets. Nuxt scripts came out, where also the point is like, okay, how do other frameworks do it? But now the implementation is, according to my knowledge, very different from what other frameworks do. Also in together with the Google Chrome Aurora team, but really happy to see that release happening. And I don't even want to get started on un.js, which is basically, let's say, a host for all the packages that are framework and runtime agnostic. So Nitro, which is the server engine of Nuxt, and like a real innovation. I also measured this, funnily, for my thesis, where I compared Next, Angular, Nuxt, and checked out the requests per second for like a real movie application, and also like Hello World and a blog. And it was insane to see how much Nitro performed better than like the standalone mode of Next or Angular. That was crazy.
Did you say for your thesis?
Yeah. I wrote the thesis where I compared JavaScript's meta frameworks.
Was this
in terms of performance?
Was this an academic thing, or was it just?
It was. Yeah. I graduated. I graduated with this. Yeah.
What? Like from university?
Yeah. Exactly. It happened in March. I still didn't release it, but yeah.
This year.
Yeah. This year.
Wow. That's what university teaches cool up-to-date stuff like this?
Well, the thing is, my supervisor, like, okay, a little sidetrack, but web development wasn't a huge thing on my university, but there were projects, and my supervisor and the team were like, okay, really cool. Let's see. They used like Angular for the project there. Then I was like, hey, Vue and Nuxt, and I built some projects with them as also part of the university and some university projects there. And I was like, yeah, I'm happy to compare all these. I'm like, okay, cool, go for it. And my other supervisor was also into like web performance, speed, and it's like there are some people that are really interested in the academic world. They're just not that many.
That is so cool. Well, congrats on, I assume you graduated since then.
Kind of. There's still some bureaucratic hurdles to figure out because
Germany.
of like, exactly.
What level is this? Is it a master's, a PhD?
It's diploma, so it's master equivalent. Yeah.
Awesome. That's great, man. Congratulations.
Thank you.
So cool. Like we have this discussion on the podcast with Kyle Simpson. We did this a long time ago in February or something. And he mentioned, a big problem with academia, especially when we talk about cutting edge things like Nitro and non.js, is usually that there's latency, meaning it takes a while for academia to catch up to where we are today and where we might be tomorrow. So it's really cool to hear that you were able to do I'm just very moved by that. It's so cool. It gives me hope for academia. Incredible.
Same.
Okay, so go ahead.
Ideally, I also want to publish the paper, still in process. Like you have to go to an academic conference and so on. So other like scientists can also take it. It's like, hey, that's the status quo more or less. Still like from half a year ago, but it didn't change as much to like, I don't know, 5 or so. So still like, okay, this is the status quo. You can take the code, you can take the resources and maybe work further on that, like quote it and so on, so on. So I hope that also might help the academic world a bit more.
Yeah, this is so great. I assume it'll be published on Archive like everything else.
As well, yes, correct. Let's see when, but it's I'm on the way to doing it.
That is so great. Okay, so Vue has innovations mostly on the framework side, like Nuxt, has server components, which isn't a novel innovation, but it's an innovation nonetheless, and has Nitro and the whole non.js ecosystem. This, I agree with, is pretty cool, and it does move the ecosystem forward in a big way, right? Because Solid Start is built on non.js primitives,
yes,
really.
10-stack start, analog as well. Yeah, all these.
And let's not forget that Vite came out of Vue, which is like the way. Yeah.
And maybe the third thing, like I usually like to mention the trifecta of like we have Vite exactly. It's like that's everywhere nowadays except one certain meta framework not using it, but that's that.
Which one?
I don't know. It starts with N and has no U in it. Anyway, so we have Vite, right? We have non.js with like, we just mentioned it. So the server engine that can be used for anything. I really love Daniel's talk at AgentConf, I think 2 years ago or something, where he basically showcased how can you build with Nitro and React? Like how can you build your own meta framework with it? It was so amazing. And the third thing, Volar. Like lots of people forget about it, but like Volar in terms of like a framework, like originally it was Vue language tools were named Volar, and then it was like, okay, what we can do for Vue for like VS Code support and in general is the language server protocol framework, so to say. So even in WebStorm, IntelliJ, they use Volar. Now it's about, okay, how can we bring that maybe to other frameworks like Svelte, like Astro, and so on, so on. So that's another thing that helps the ecosystem and people like. So many people in the Vue community, like Daniel, like Anthony, Anthony Fu, Daniel Rowe, of course Evan as well. Lots of the Vue core team people, and they're all focused on the ecosystem. Not only like, okay, this is for the Vue community and that's cool, but it's more like influencing everyone with it, like making a difference, and helping the whole JavaScript community.
I love that. This reminds me of a talk. So I was there, by the way, for Daniel. That's where Daniel Rowe and I met at AgentConf last year.
Oh, really? Okay.
Yeah. We spent quite a bit of time. Great person. And also, I remember Evan Yu's talk. For those listening who don't know, he's the author, the creator of Vue. He did this talk at Render ATL last year, where he, it was a lay of the land of all the frameworks and stuff. And in the end, he's like, look, we need each other. Like, we're actually better together. We're not like trying to eat each other's lunch. And you can really see that with the work of non.js and all of the contributions to the whole ecosystem. I think that's really cool. So I'm happy to hear that Nuxt has a server components implementation, because this is something I was talking about recently at React Rally with a bunch of, it's a React conference, so with like Kent C. Dodds and Brian Florence and the Remix team, where we recognize that really there isn't any other server components implementation out there yet that's like ready for production. Some would say even React server components implementation is not ready for production. But this idea of you in a framework like Nuxt or Next.js, you fetch the data needed for a page if you have file system based routing, and then that data is available to the page, and then you render your page. The boundary is the page level, but to move one level down more granular and be like, this component is going to execute on the server. This component alone is going to execute on the server, get its data that it needs, and then stream HTML or stream maybe client-side view to the client is something novel that doesn't exist, right? And so I'm very interested to follow that. We'll maybe put links for people to follow that as well. I have to assume it's quite complex. I remember talking to Daniel Rowe at AgentConf, and he mentioned that Vue has something that a lot of frameworks, including React frameworks, don't have, which is, and I apologize, I meant Nuxt, not Vue, which is hybrid components. So in React, you either have a server component or a client component, but you can't have a component that executes in both. And this exists in Nuxt. Can we talk about that? Do you have exposure to that? Can we understand how it executes?
I'm really curious. Like I would love to hear Daniel's thought on that, and maybe I'm going the whole wrong way. But so the idea is right now there's Nuxt island component. And the idea is you can fetch, in theory, that even goes further, content to render even from a different application. So really, in theory, you can say like there are different Nuxt applications, or like wherever there's a component, you want to fetch it and then use it, or like you want to like call a different API endpoint that renders the component on the server. You insert it, and then the client part of it will trigger. So that works already. It's, as we said, it's experimental. Also, Julian Huang, who is also working a lot on server components, talked about it. Happy to share some links on that too. And more or less the idea, if we come back to without the remote part, which you have to enable explicitly because security, of course, is very similar. Okay, you have an API, like a Nitro API handler that renders your server component. You pass your props there, and it will return what should be inserted. And then if there is a tag, like an attribute called Nuxt client, then, for example, on another component, that component will then execute on the client side. So you can have a server like a client component and a server component, or you can have parts of the server component be executed on the client side.
Awesome. I think is a true innovation, and I'd love to see that go forward. Let's talk a little bit about frameworks, libraries, and meta frameworks, because there's people who fight about terminology. I would love to have you correct my terminology, or like just like discuss briefly what these terms mean, right? Because I was told that one of the biggest advantages of Vue is that you don't need a build system. You don't need Babel. You don't need Vite. You can unpackage. You can install it via CDN. Just a script tag in vanilla HTML. It just works.
Yes.
If that's the case, then I don't really see like a frame of working. It's not telling me where to put my directory structure. It's not telling me like, have this configuration, server side rendering. It doesn't have any opinions. It's a script I include. It's literally just functions. And I've typically seen this be called a library, not a framework. But then there's Vue, where you have .vue files. You have a build system, and now we start to have opinions. And now some would say, okay, this makes Vue a framework, and that would then rightfully make Nuxt a meta framework, meaning a framework about the framework Vue. So yeah, where do we land on this? Because like if I think of something like Lodash, which is you import the script and it gives you a bunch of functions to call. That's a library, right? Nobody listening to this would say Lodash is a framework.
That's correct.
So how do we think about this in the Vue ecosystem?
I would still root that Vue as a framework, mainly because I would say, like, I like the distinction as a library you use in your code, but a framework, you write code in the framework's mental model, and the framework is using your code, so to say.
Yes.
So, but if you say you define a Vue component, right? Then you directly there, you use like reactivity from Vue. You use the lifecycle hooks from Vue. So in a way, if you write code, let's say in a before mounts function, then the code will be executed before the Vue component mounts. So Vue is using the code you wrote to execute whenever that component is ready. So I would say that still goes for framework for sure. I still agree with like, okay, you can use it in a script tag, and I think that's a big pro also, just get started, or like, okay, I don't need to build stuff, I can just smash it on somewhere and write something. You don't have single file components because this would need like a transformation you can't do. Maybe in the future browsers support something like that, but right now it's not the case. So there are also some limitations, also in terms of like how you write a template and so on and so on. But still, like at least some code you write, also like in the setup function with the composition API, write in the setup function, and Vue is using that code when the component is mounted to be executed. So I would say it's rightfully called a framework. And also shortly on that note, there is a part of Vue that is actually a library. And I think lots of people are not aware of that, which is Vue's reactivity system. Because @Vue/reactivity is a standalone package you can use in any kind of project to get ref, reactive, computed. So like,
wow, so it's not dependent on Vue at all.
No, not at all. Actually, it's even used to build something like Alpine.js, also very popular in the Laravel universe and ecosystem, or also like other frameworks use it under the hood for their reactivity system because it's proven it works well. So why not go in for it?
That is so cool. I'm going to use this. So it's sort of like RxJS in this case. It's just like a reactive library I can import and use whenever I want.
Yes, of course not using observables in that way, but exactly. You have like watch effect, you have also now in like a proper watcher and everything, you have ref and all that. So
cool.
go
this
for
sounds
it,
like a really great entry into Vue for people who don't write Vue already, right? Like you start playing with a reactive system and then you just like literally just add single file components around it. Boom, you're good. That's really, I will definitely start playing with that when I have a project.
I would say, especially with Astro, sorry to do it. Like, I remember Astro was showing a little demo, and somebody was even posting below, like, wait, because of like, okay, if you have like an effect, say, okay, if something changes, then change the inner HTML of something. That's perfect for Vue reactivity, right? You can basically just use that to make your code easier to grasp, and that's I think also a good way to get into that and start without like everything of Vue. If you just need a bit of reactivity and otherwise stay vanilla. Also, it's very small.
It's so cool that Vue is so modular that you can just pick and choose pieces that you want. You mentioned Vapor earlier, the compilation engine for Vue that helps make it extremely more performant by identifying static parts of your application that just don't need to be reactive and compiling them into the underlying markup, I have to believe. So this is very similar to the React compiler that the meta team is talking about, which just intelligently memoizes things. Of course, the reactivity model is completely different, and no matter how much you memoize React, it will never be as computationally cheap as Vue or Solid because you still have to call every function component, even if it returns immediately, right?
Yeah.
So the reason I'm bringing this up is Vapor is cool. It's a compiler that makes everything faster, and recently, very, very recently, I heard that React components and Svelte components and other components also work on Vapor. What does that mean? Like, what kind of Frankenstein application would you build this way that works with React and Vapor?
So I have to double check. I remember I saw the tweet about that. I was like, I bookmarked it. I didn't take a look at it yet. But I think the idea of like, okay, it's basically a signal, like an effect based, right? Like signal effect based template, or like template compiler. Let's say something like that. And yeah, Kazupon was tweeting that. I see. Let me quickly have a look live here because I can imagine cool. if that works well interoperably with an actual Vue application. It's also like, okay, you have ref and reactive. You have more or less your deeply reactive signals. Then why wouldn't it work if you use something like Svelte as well? But even here I see that it even works with useState and React.
Yeah,
so that's
isn't that strange?
That's amazing, actually.
Yeah, I'm glad I've apparently I've come up with information that is so new that you haven't yet had. This is so cool. I feel very cutting edge right now.
It is. I mean, it came out yesterday at 10 a.m. And it's Kazupon, who is the maintainer of Vue ITN and also Nuxt ITN. Just like, hey, hello, how about using these all together? I will definitely hit him up after the episode and be like, wait, tell me more. Also, we'll hopefully see him in Japan because there's a conference called VueFest coming in October. So that will be pretty sick.
We'll probably also get him on this podcast. Maybe he's a good candidate for DejaVue also.
Oh yeah, that's for sure. Sure. I have him on the list already. It's sometimes just a bit difficult with time zones because my co-host Michael is in Canada, and then we have some difficult overlaps, but we'll make it happen.
Wow, that's wild.
Yes. One sec for the interoperability. Actually, there is a library called Reactive. It's not super up to date. It's also from Anthony Fu, who did all the amazing things out there, like lots of amazing things. And this is basically the idea of using the Vue composition API in React components. So that's also something to have a look into, just of like how interoperability is possible. Because
Yeah.
sometimes it's just amazing.
I mean, you mentioned that Vue Reactive, this NPM package, can be used anywhere outside of Vue. So then
Correct.
it begs the question, can I use it inside React? Can I say goodbye to React's reactive model and just use, these primitives and signals in React? How would that affect my React code base?
The problem is that you can't do the same code style, because how React updates, like if you can trigger basically an update to a component through React without using React's functions, then yes. But so if you just have it with vanilla HTML, then you say like, okay, you have a ref, and when it changes, you say set the inner HTML of a different element to another value, right? But I think you would like Reactive Vue is basically wrapping the React API to make sure you can use it with Vue's composition API, also like with lifecycle hooks and everything. So that needs a little bit of more work. That's why that library exists. I wish it would just be like, okay, here's Vue reactivity. You don't need to care about your framework's reactivity, but because it's so deeply integrated with the framework, it's not that easy, unfortunately. But I tried it out as well.
And how was your experience?
Yes, correct.
I see. There's a lot of AI space innovations with Vue. I'm seeing a lot of things. So like recently v0.dev, this is Vercel's AI generator for components, recently got Vue support. Congratulations. Yes. There's also, I saw on social media, somebody built an AI-powered search engine with Vue.js. I don't know if you've seen this.
I didn't see that. I saw V0, but...
What's happening on the Vue side with AI? Is there any discussion around maybe adding support for streaming such that the LLM responses come in more comfortably with Vue? Is this something that's being discussed on the Vue side, or is it just like, let's just lean on Vercel's AI SDK because they do support Vue and let them figure it out? Is there like internal discussion in the Vue ecosystem on this?
So also I think this would rather fit in the Nuxt ecosystem in terms of if you have a stream you want to process, I think then you can even write a framework agnostic library and be like, okay, let's then wrap that more or less into something. But so I used ChatGPT recently, like the API, the Open API as well, with Vue Nuxt. And the good part is because of the server engine of Nitro can handle all the things. Like Nitro can handle streams, Nitro can handle responses. So it's very, very easy even to say like, okay, you get that response, you want certain parts out of it, and then send it again as a stream to make sure that works fine without exposing your API key and all that. If you only have Vue in the front end, that's a bit tricky otherwise. So I did that, and it works really, really smooth. There's even a template I built with a client of mine, actually, but we open sourced it eventually, about like a very simple, like if you have a ChatGPT assistant and then just want to render that, want to just ask questions, like a very simple UI for that. And the Nitro part of like, okay, here's how we hooked it up. And that works very, very smooth. I think there can still be like helpers or options, though. I'm a big fan, especially if it's something that's very like, that needs a lot of fine-tuning and a lot of configuration or own code. I'm a bigger fan of giving the recipe, so the implementation to the people, than saying, here's my module, because then there will be the wildest requests, or like, here's the library. And we're like, oh, I want to do this and that. Rather, like, this is how we do it, take it, customize it, and you're good.
Awesome. Yeah. Thank you for that. I think that's the way to go, instead of like being too paternalistic and prescriptive with things, is just teach the mechanism and say, now you know. I wanted to get your thoughts on, recently there was a really, really interesting hot take on X, formerly Twitter. I say recently, this was in April, but Josh Manders says that the Vue.js and Nuxt.js ecosystems code quality is a problem to its success, meaning the code quality of these projects is like, it poses a problem to their success because, and then he continues in his second sentence, he says, and we'll put a link to this in the show notes, he says, it's so pleasant and just works that nobody complains about it on Twitter. So it's not constantly being talked about and people sort of just forget it exists because it's so nice. Like, and I think of Steve Jobs, he often used to say that sometimes when you have really great technology, it just like blends into the background, What are your thoughts on that?
First of all, shout out. Also follow Josh on Twitter. Or like X, it's called nowadays, nevertheless. I actually gave a talk about it at a German conference called Enter.js this year, about Vue. And I agree. The problem is Vue is becoming boring technology because it just works. Nobody complains. Usually you have one way of doing things. You don't have big Twitter drama. The only thing, of course, is still options versus composition API. There are like there are very big opinions about it, and I feel like every quarter, half a year on Reddit, one thread blows up because of that, and it's always the same. Like, people have opinions, and that's fine. Both are here to stay. But and I see also the drawbacks of the composition API in terms of you need people architecture and finding solutions. But nevertheless, this is the only point where people are really like, let's say, fighting. There is no big tension otherwise. Like, and in a way, yeah, that makes Vue a bit less likely to exposure just because, well, there's no big drama about it. But on the other hand, amazing things like, as we said before, the Nuxt dev tools or non.js, they will also point away towards Vue again. So I think that can also help. And I also hope that, for example, some of the content that I release, either with the podcast or also with the videos, shows like, hey, this is super easy to do. So why not giving it a try and see if it works for you?
I must admit, through this discussion, I want to play with Vue more. And I think all the listeners would probably be on the same page. Behind you, there's something that says, and I'm literally looking at your camera, it says NXT4, but it could say next. I don't know.
There's
it's
a U.
Blurred.
There's a U. Wait.
Oh, there we go. All right.
There's the proof.
He's not a double agent. For those listening on audio, he's got a thing that behind him that says Nuxt 4.
Yeah.
As I understand it, Nuxt 4 is upcoming. Nuxt 3 is the current way, and I saw people get very excited about the fact that Nuxt 4 may ship with a dedicated config directory. So with Next.js, you have a folder called .next that contains some like metadata about your next project. With Vue, I believe you have a .nuxt directory that has some metadata about your Nuxt project. But now they're talking about in Nuxt, there's going to be .config that contains configuration. And all I know is that people got very, very excited about this. And I don't know why. Can we speak to why people are like, it's a config directory? What am I missing?
Yeah, so I think there's just one major part. This is already works in Nuxt 3. So the support for that is already there if you want to. It's just, the idea is, if you have your top level project root, how many configs you have there? Post CSS config, Vite config, maybe a Nuxt config, Tailwind CSS config, and countless more, ESLint config, of course, Vitas config, and so on. So Playwright, whatnot. Insert random technology here, basically. And that's all cool, but it also feels a bit cluttered, as in like, why? Why can't we just have a .config folder where we have all the configs and make sure, okay, if I want to configure something, there is the way to go. And the rest is like, it's just a bit more clear where we can find all the things. So with Nuxt, you usually just have one config file, which is the nuxt.config.ts or JS if you want to write JavaScript. And of course you can add others, like you can and should add like a vtest config if you need one, or a Tailwind CSS config, even though you could also write it in Nuxt config nowadays, except you use like functions, imports, whatnot. So our idea was that like, okay, we have one single entry point for all the configurations, and as long as it works. And then if there's something else, of course, sometimes you can't avoid it, or sometimes because everything in Nuxt config has to be serializable, so no functions, no classes, whatnot. We need an extra file, so some packages might need another one. And putting it all in .config would be cool. And Puya, who's also the mastermind behind most of the non.js packages besides Daniel and Anthony, proposed it, made a PR to support, and I really hope this will get some traction. So maybe that's also something we should... Actually, maybe it's something I should make a video about. You gave me a good idea for that. Definitely, we'll credit, because that's something like, I think if that's an ecosystem-wide thing that would just work, like why not?
Yeah, and I think honestly it's needed. I didn't know why people got so excited about it, but now that you explain it, for sure I see a lot of dot files. Like you look at any of my repos, like you said, there's all this configuration. How cool would it be if we just move that somewhere? Now the question, I'm assuming everything in there, that should definitely not be get ignored, right? Because it's built configuration.
It should be committed. Project. Correct.
Yeah. But that's so cool to get that out of the way and then like have your code be the focus. I'm surprised now that you mentioned it that we didn't think of this before. Another really, really awesome feature that I saw with Nuxt.js that blew my mind, because I want something this easy across the ecosystem, is you can run, and correct me if this is wrong, but I remember seeing this on the socials. If you run Nuxt dev and then dash dash HTTPS.
Yeah.
You just get like full just secure localhost, which is great if you're interfacing with secure backends that don't allow you to call them from HTTP only. Is that true? How does that work?
Yep, that's correct. Yeah, it's all in the CLI, and there's even one more thing. You can do like a PNPM or npm run or whatever, Nuxt dev dash dash tunnel, and there will be a Cloudflare tunnel open for you, so you can share it. Basically, can grok like our local tunnel or whatever built in for free. There's even a package called Unton, also from un.js, of course, developed by Puya, who allows that to do on your PC without the framework even. You can do it with everything. Just select their support and there you go.
There's a video of me. Somebody posted a video of me on X where I am just having my mind blown by Daniel Rowe. It's literally
yes, I remember that. I saw it.
This is one of those moments where I'm hearing this and I go like, what? Okay, we need to talk about this because what you're describing sounds like ngrok or ngrok.
Yeah, exactly.
I don't know how people. But is that how this works? Because okay, ngrok is not free. Like it's free in a limited capacity, but you have to start paying. Obviously, like you have a tunnel exposed over HTTPS to someone's machine. There's costs involved. Like this isn't just this can't be unlimited free. But you're telling me it is. How does that work?
Cloudflare quick tunnels is the answer. That's what's used under the hood, and that's it.
And that's like, just free.
It's
like
free.
You can have millions of people opening tunnels all over the world, and it's just free.
There is a hard limit of requests. Like you have, I think like 250. I think 200 in-flight requests that are like concurrent. That are like okay, then that's enough. But just like hey. Here is a little presentation for a client. Click on that link. It's open there. It will work for a bit. I will shut it down in an hour. Yeah, that's an option.
Do you need a Cloudflare account to spin up one of these?
I don't think so. No. That shouldn't be the case. No.
This is the most wow. Okay. Honestly, like I've been a React user as I mentioned for 10 years. But Vue's cool. Don't get me wrong. But when we start talking about Nuxt and the developer experience of Nuxt, it's another level, isn't it? I mean, like especially like the dev tools alone. I remember Daniel blowing my mind about like if you're using Tailwind, the dev tools for Nuxt for those listening is pluggable. You can add plugins to it and it can do whatever you want. So if you have a Tailwind configuration in a Nuxt project, you add the Tailwind DevTools plugin and like it shows you your Tailwind config like in a rich way. It's live. So if I change tailwind.config.js, like the DevTools just update in real time. Where is this in Next.js? Where is this in any other framework? I think honestly, Nuxt has such great developer experience. And I'm just like lost for words.
And the best part is it doesn't stop there. As you said, it's pluggable. You can write your own like little DevTools integration for your application. And usually if I showcase the DevTools, what I just do for fun, there is a VS Code tab. You can run. So the DevTools are not like a Chrome extension. They run in your application. And it's a Nuxt application running in your Nuxt application. And there you can have a VS Code, right, baked into the DevTools that connects via VS Code server to your own project. So from the project that's running right now, you can change your project, save it, and it will update. So that's some crazy inception parts there, and that works. Yeah, give it a try.
This is not backed by like Meta or some big corporation. No. There's like people who like building great stuff. Great stuff.
Also, that's very good to mention. Like the people working on Nuxt, like we all have different sources of income, right? Like Daniel is like a independent open source developer. He has an article about it, how he's funded. He's sponsored by Nuxt Labs, the company that Sebastian, the creator of Nuxt, founded to basically, this is similar like Laravel, for example, build services around Nuxt that maybe help teams, right? And like make open source sustainable. But for example, like, okay, there are people working for the company, but most of the core team, they have like day jobs or like I am, for example, fully like also self-employed, freelance, a show of one. So we all have different sources of income, and we're not backed by one big company, which is also why we're always happy for sponsorships or shoutouts, of course.
That's so cool. Yeah, let's try and get you some because like this is so cool. I mean, it is truly the best DX of any. Maybe actually Astro doesn't even have dev tools. I often say Astro has the best DX for these kinds of things, but they don't have dev tools.
They have like a bar now, right? Like a toolbar, I think.
Yeah, that's I don't know if that's like dev tools at the level of Nuxt dev tools, but it is cool. Yeah, they have a little debug bar.
I think also that like all these, it's also a good example for like, okay, Nuxt dev tools came out and some frameworks like, hey, we can maybe do something similar for our needs. And that's also, I think, what came around. And it's a good idea because if more people, like if more frameworks get that, it's easier for developers. Like we also have lots of ideas how we can improve the dev tools more. Like we probably shared it before, something like A11Y to have like accessibility issues highlighted in the dev tools, or same with performance. Like, oh, you have an image, yeah, but you didn't set the width and the height of it, but you should. And with one click, you can just set it to what it is right now. So these are the visions we have as well to work with the dev tool. So it will be easy because honestly, yeah, not all developers are accessibility expert. I'm also not an expert, and like I know all the good tricks there, or like all the rules. I know what WCAG too, right? Sure, but just having a list of like, hey, this could be improved. Hey, these are the automated things. This is the bare minimum you can do with one click. Why not reducing the hurdle for the people? Make it easy to build like amazing web applications. That's the goal.
That's so cool. I'm so happy to see Vue be. We talked earlier about Vue like innovating and stuff, and this is leaps and bounds ahead. What's V-Model? So I'm a React developer.
Yes.
I don't. So I noticed Vue has different primitives for like control flow. For example, you have these directives like v-if, and if that's truthy, then the component will render. You have v-switch. I don't know if that's even true. But there's things. Okay, well,
yes.
I tried.
You have v-if, v-else if you have as well. We have v-show. I wonder what's the difference of v-show and v-if? Well, the v-show is just the CSS display on and no display on, and v-if is actual removing it from the DOM.
Awesome. Thank you. What is there a v4? There's v4.
There is also v4. Yes, correct. Nice. Exactly. Okay, like great. Basically everything you do in JSX with like maps and so on, then you can do with Vue directives. And V-Model.
Yeah, this was my question. Yeah, I was going to ask about V-Model because there's no like JSX equivalent to this, I think.
So the idea is it's all about data binding. So if you have an input element, like an HTML input element, then, okay, if you write something in your input element, then you want to have it reflected in your ref, for example. The other way around as well, if I have a button, let's have a counter, right? Counter, like, okay, we have the count, ref 0 as before, and then we have a render and template, right? And maybe you have an input to say, okay, let's set the count. Usually have a button, but let's just do an input. And we have a button next to it saying reset. So what you could do is, with V-Model, in that input, ideally set type number, right? And then you write v-model equals count, and it established a two-way data binding, which means...
Wait. So count here, the identifier count. So I do something like const count equals ref of 0.
Yeah.
And then in V-Model, I pass count as a string. And
so everything, so for expressions, that's also very important to mention. For all Vue expressions, everything inside the quotes is JavaScript. So if you have a v-if, then in there, that's JavaScript. A JavaScript expression, so it can't do like if or something in there, like no control flow. Or no variable assignments, but you can, of course, just reference these.
Interesting, but it looks like a string syntactically because it's in double quotes. Is there a VS Code extension that like adds syntax highlight, like JavaScript expression style syntax highlighting to these?
Oh yeah, of course. This is all done by the Vue extension, also based on Volar, which I mentioned before. So also big shout out to Johnson, who is maintaining that. Really, really amazing work there. And I think like he got recently, there were like some people not so happy with certain things because there was a bug in the Microsoft store where the Vue extension was there twice, and there were like updates from VS Code that broke certain things, and it was a bit tricky. But he got like quite some negativity, and like he's doing a phenomenal job on there. And of course, sometimes things break. Like we are in a developer ecosystem, especially if you have all these dependencies. But he's really working really hard on that, and big appreciation towards him there.
Okay, awesome. That so it's just that V-Model says take like the value of this input or this whatever is bound to this const that I declared in my script block.
And the other way around too. So if you write something in your input, right, then okay, there will be an event, like usually at input, and basically V-Model is syntactic sugar, so to say. You can do the same with more lines of code. You can say :value equals count. So I say you bind the HTML attribute value to count, and whenever it's basically shorthand for v-bind :count :value equals count, but we just do the colon because it's shorter. And on the other way around as well, like at input, like whenever the input event was fired, so whenever you write something in there, then you want to say, okay, set count to the new value. So it works in both ways. So whenever, for example, you write something in the input field, it will be updated. But if the count ref is changed, for example, for the reset button, because on reset you say set count to 0, then it's also reflected in the input field. So it's really two-way data binding with just this directive.
Interesting. That's so cool. Do people use that a lot, or is there a better way to?
No, that's the common thing. You can also use it on own components, like custom components you write. There you have a macro that's rather new. In 3.4 it came out called define model. Before you had to set, okay, there might be a model value, and then you have to emit update model value. But this is way easier now with the define model macro. But yeah, also custom components can establish these two-way data bindings, and it's really neat.
Awesome. That's so cool. Thank you for that. I saw a lot of hype around. Thank you, by the way, for just like answering questions that I see as hype in the Vue ecosystem. I think this is so cool. I saw Vue running on Apple Vision Pro. I don't know if you saw this as well. That's kind of bananas. Do we know yet if it's just regular Vue, or do you need to do some type of extra syntax to make it work? Because it's a whole different input set, but it's effectively just running the web platform, you know?
Yeah,
so like
I think that's all it needs, right? Like if it's just running on the web, then it's fine. But on that note, I also want to highlight, I mean, I know React has like React Fiber, for example, and also Drei, I know as well, like on the 3D space.
React
Vue
3
also,
Fiber, yeah.
Yeah, and like there is a project called Tress.js by Alvaro from the community, and he is in the team, of course. And they are basically trying to do declarative 3JS components, like you'd write Vue components. And that's a really, really cool project if you are into like 3D, because also the idea is to wrap the 3JS API, make things easier and make it all reactive as well. So if you change things, it's reflected and updated. And they also put quite some work on it, and quite a few things work really well there. So also worth mentioning for sure when we came up to like Apple Vision Pro and for like, oh yeah, 3D, moving things around.
That's so cool. You could build your own Iron Man style studio workplace with the Vue and Apple Vision Pro. That is so cool. Nuxt.js 4. We talked about this config directory. What else is something that's coming up in this next version of Nuxt that you're like, oh my gosh, this is going to be so great. Everybody's going to love it. It's going to be, a whole game changer.
Yeah, I'm very happy that we come back to that. I also wanted to. That's perfect. So just as to mention, the .config is already available in Nuxt 3 if you want to. So it's optional. You can do that. But in Nuxt 4, that's the best part. Like, the biggest feature shipped in Nuxt 4 is nothing, literally, because Nuxt 4 is about breaking changes. And I think this is something it's really tricky in today's world, because every major release is like a big hype. Or like, oh yeah, we bring out the next major version of this and this, like, as I said, oh, iOS 18, so many new changes, the new iPhone, I don't know, 16, whatsoever. And well, if we follow semantic versioning, right, like many libraries do. So the idea is major version equals breaking changes. And the idea is that people shouldn't be too hyped about like, oh yeah, Nuxt 4 did many amazing features. More like what we want to do, especially after Nuxt 2 to Nuxt 3, which was kind of rocky because so many things changed. Maybe that's a good part. It's like, okay, from Nuxt 2 to Nuxt 3, what changed? Vue 2 to Vue 3. There was Vite coming out as well. So we also support Webpack 5. We had some internal changes, and most importantly, the whole library ecosystem changed as well. So there were a lot of things that came together, and it took a while to bring out the next major version of Nuxt, right? The Nuxt major version, so to say. And now what we want to show, like, okay, migration wasn't that easy. Still, quite some people are migrating just because it's not just breaking changes from Nuxt. Otherwise, piece of cake. But that's different now. And with Nuxt 4, we want to really show that. We want to show, okay, we have some breaking changes. We document them. There are also some of them implemented already. So you have a future flag. It's called compatibility version. You can enable it, set it to 4. You get all the breaking changes right away. You have a migration guide with like how important, like how big of an impact that might be to your application, what you have to change, and how you can revert a change if you really want to. Maybe until you have adapted your, I don't know, on modules, your dependencies, whatsoever. So this is really the focus of Nuxt 4. It's not about features because we ship them almost every month in minor versions, like 3.13, for example, and also modules, like it doesn't everything has to be in the core. So yeah, Nuxt 4 is all about that.
I love this. You're like teaching us how to get rid of bad old habits and where we get super hyped for breaking changes. But we have to learn as an ecosystem to, when we see a new major version, go like, okay, there's nothing special here. Things are just going to break. But if we see 4.1, whoa, this something's coming. If we see 4.3, okay, so that's awesome. So nothing's going to change much. Things may break. You may need to do some code changes. But in terms of features, those will be 4.1.
Yeah, so I mean, I wouldn't rule out that there are features. Like, it also depends. Some breaking changes might be features. So what we do right now, the directory structure might be a good point. I also made a video about that, about the improved directory structure. And you can already enable it. I enable it for most of my projects by default because it's a very easy change. So in Nuxt 3, what you had is we have a pages directory for your pages, components, composables for how you share logic with the Vue composition API is you build composables, which are functions using the Vue composition API, so lifecycle hooks, reactivity, and so on. So you put them in there and all that. So we have that all at top level. And there's also another folder called server, and that's everything on the server side. So basically the Nitro part of Nuxt. And the problem with this is first, it's a bit tough for people to understand what belongs to what, like what is Nuxt, what is Nitro. And also with watching, because if you watch, like if Chokedar watches the top level folder, it has to watch also all the nested ones, and node modules is also top level, so not that nice. So in Nuxt 4, we said, okay, we create a new folder, it's called app. And in the app, that's where basically the Vue and let's say Nuxt client side part lives. And the server part is everything with server, like your API routes, your server middleware, database stuff, whatsoever. And that's one of the biggest changes. Another thing that's under PR right now, but that we want to implement, and when this airs, it's probably already out. And which I look really forward to is another folder next to app and server, and it's called shared. Because very often, if you have a full stack project, because Nuxt can be used as a full stack project, full stack framework, right? Then you have types or utils that are not necessarily bound to either the Nuxt or Nitro part. You maybe want to use them in both. So what you usually do then, well, you can either do it manually, like set up a shared folder, but then you don't have auto imports, which is also a neat feature of Nuxt out of the box, and you also can disable if you want to. And same for types, like you want them ideally to be just there. So not too tricky, but we want to set up this shared folder. And very important, this shared folder also gets import protection. That's actually what Daniel was working today on the stream that I watched while preparing a few things. So import protection means they're not allowed to import, for example, a Vue component in there, because it can be used on the server side or on the client side. But you shouldn't import like a Pina store Vue component in your Nitro part, because that's before the whole Nuxt application boots up.
How does that implement it? Like in React, to do something like this, you would, when you import, for example, a server component and a client component, the bundler would, the bundler would look at the use server directive at the top and be like, you can't do that here. So that's, quote unquote, import protection. Mm-hmm. Similarly, if you try to import a client component into a server component, then it will say, hey, you're using something stateful here. You can't have client state on the server. Or, hey, you have an event listener. You can't have that on the server. So that's, in import protection. Is that similar? Do you just like read the abstract syntax tree and go like, this is an event listener. You're not allowed to import it? Or how does that work?
So kind of, we just do it even easier. Yeah, we have an unplugin. So unplugin also in non.js, it's basically a unified plugin system for Rollup, Webpack, Vite, and so on, so on. So like for all the bundlers, RSPack as well. And the idea is that this is also a separate package that's been worked on. But right now it's also Nuxt existing. So we say, okay, in that plugin, we just analyze what you import in a certain files. And if you import something from the source directory or the server directory, then it's like, no, that's not possible.
Interesting. So it's based on the directory, not on the source code. That's interesting.
So, yes, correct. We check like the import statements, and if there's something out of a certain directory, then we say like, no, or like from a certain package as well. Yep.
Awesome. So you could have a false positive there, just move it to the right directory, and then you're good.
Well, I think false positives might be a bit tricky, because if it's the server folder, like let's say if it's the app folder, and you import something from the app folder in a shared, then it's like, that's not okay, because it should work on both sides. So you either, like, I think for that might be a bit tricky. For other scenarios, I remember there was a let's say, problem, because a lot of people, so we have something called Nuxt Kit. Maybe it's not with that. That's basically build time things for modules, for Nuxt modules, because Nuxt is very extensive. You can build your own modules that do whatever, can register plugins, put in pages, and so on and so on. And the idea is, Nuxt Kit provides functionalities there. And there's a logger, but quite some people imported a logger in runtime code. So while that worked, it was never intended like that. And when the import protection landed quite some versions ago, some people were like, hey, I have this issue. And the idea is, okay, just import the logger from the actual package and not from Nuxt Kit, because it works, it's fine, but you should never have Nuxt Kit in a runtime code. It's always only build time. And for these things, that's basically built to like protect users from foot guns.
From themselves.
Yes, exactly.
I'd like to talk about performance. We've talked a lot about features and so on. Mm-hmm. Let's talk about performance. With React, I've caused infinite loops using useEffect and not passing in a second argument to this function. There's also, in React, it's fairly easy to run to performance problems because of the whole model, right? You have functions calling each other recursively, so if you don't memoize intentionally or attentively, you'll probably have performance problems. In solid.js, it's very, very easy to cause not performance problems, but functionality problems. For example, if you destructure a reactive property, you just opt out of reactivity without knowing. So there's like foot guns. What are in Vue.js? You do consulting for Vue.js. What are some advanced techniques for optimizing performance in Vue and Nuxt apps that maybe people haven't heard of that have been super valuable for you over time?
So I think the foot guns that you mentioned, like opting out of reactivity, I have a whole video on how to avoid losing reactivity, which is a big thing, because if you destructure a reactive object, not a ref, that's fine. But like if you destruct a reactive thing and props, for example, also reactive by default, then you lose reactivity. With props though, a new Vue feature came out, I think 3.4 or 3.5, no, I think, one of these. It's experimental for a while. It got stable. I think it will be stable in 3.5, but might be in 3.4 already. It's called props destructuring. Or reactive props destructuring, which actually allows you to destructure props. So that foot gun is just gone because, the compiler can handle it, and one less thing to worry about. But yeah, like losing reactivity is a big thing. It's not necessarily only about performance, but more about, why that code doesn't update? And the same with like the understanding between passing a ref. So let's say you have const count equals ref of 0. So you can pass count, or you can pass count.value. And if you pass counts to, let's say, a composable that does something with it, then it's the reactive reference. So whenever that changes, the composable can react to it. As soon as you use .value, though, the reactivity is like it ends at that point because, you pass only the value. There are some, let's say, exceptions. For example, if you define a computed property, let's say, is even, then you say computed function, and then arrow function, count.value, %2. Like, count the value modulo 2, more or less. Modulo 0, sorry. Modulo 2 is correct. Then you also use .value, but you define a computed property. So it basically evaluates the function whenever count changes, and it's reactive again. So what you get out of it is, once again, a read-only ref that will update whenever count updates. So there are some exceptions, but otherwise, I see very often people using something.value, and then they wonder why it doesn't update, but it shouldn't. That's the end. So I think that's a very big foot gun that people are just not aware of when they write code. Also, the whole like nested part that we discussed before, that you actually have to set watch deep if you want nested reactivity. That's a thing. Performance improvement can also be shallow ref to say, in lots of cases, actually two big ones, data fetching, and I would say integrating third-party state management like immutable, like Immer.js whatsoever, then you want a shallow ref to use. Because if you know exactly that your content will only be replaced and not changed, why nested reactivity? And that's also a foot gun that we avoided and eliminated in Nuxt 4, because by default, you can also set it in Nuxt 3 already as an option, but in Nuxt 4, all our data fetching composables, they use shallow ref by default. So there are a few things. Of course, the whole web performance topic with like images, to use like Nuxt image, make sure they have different sizes, modern formats and all that. I think these are also like pretty common ones. And then I think a lot of people are sleeping on the whole Nitro, like the whole Nuxt route rules and Nitro caching APIs. So what you can do is you can cache the API routes that you define in Nitro as you want, even with style while validate. But that means server-side SWR is really uncommon, but let's say you have an API and that changes, I don't know, once a day. It's not important to have like super like real-time data. It's fine if it updates an hour later or something. So what you can do, like in client-side SWR, you do a request, you get the cache data. In the background then, after the cache data is delivered, the server engine, so Nitro, will update the value, like refetch the data, the original data, and will then put it in the cache so the next user will get it. That can be super helpful, especially for things that are not time critical. So I think that's also an important one. In general, mixing different rendering modes. So saying, I have a page that should always be static, then you can pre-render it. Or I have 1,000 pages, then don't pre-render them, just set just set static to true. So whenever they're actually hit, they're saved until next deployment, and so on. So there are also quite some goodies in the Nuxt route rules, which is basically a way to say for certain paths, set up headers, allow course, redirect, and also these caching rules.
Are these specified in Nuxt config.js or Nuxt
Correct.
config.ts? Okay,
Yes.
okay. Awesome. Thank you for that. One of the biggest foot gun, probably, with data fetching in React is that the vast majority of developers who don't use a framework fetch too late, meaning they fetch inside a use effect hook, and then they get the response from this fetch request and then use set state to set that into state. This is extremely problematic for many reasons. Mainly, you have to first wait for React to load, then you have to wait for your site to render, then you have to wait for that component to render, then in its effect, you fetch. Like, you have to just wait. There's so much time spent waiting that you don't actually give the user something useful. And the right way to fetch in React is as early as possible. That is typically as soon as somebody hits your route, on the server side, you fetch and make the data available instantly, right? How easy is it to fall into that foot gun in Vue and or Nuxt?
I think it makes a lot of sense to, like, as soon as you know that you need data, then fetch them. Like, I think that's a straightforward principle, at least from like my Vue brain, let's say. The thing is, if you don't know if you need it or not, you can prefetch, for example, components. You can prefetch routes. You can even make components lazy, of course, to say, okay, that's also very easy. You have a lazy prefix. So if you have a component in your components folder in Nuxt, you can just, instead of saying, I don't know, app hero, you can say lazy app hero. Might not be the best example because it's above the fold, but let's say app modal might be better. So then you say lazy app modal. It will be in its own chunk. So if you use VF with it.
So just by the file name, it becomes automatically lazy loaded.
Not even a file name. If you write lazy in your template, then it will be lazy loaded. Yeah.
Wow.
So you can use app modal normally if you need it straight away open, but in some other scenarios you might want to have it lazy, and it's fine. So you write lazy, and if used then with a VIF, then it will be an own chunk, because otherwise, if you need it anyway, an own chunk doesn't make sense. So yeah, and then it will only be loaded when it's actually triggered, or you can prefetch that component to say, oh, I know I might need it in a bit. Let's load it after the rest is done. And so on, so on. So there are quite some strategies to make sure that at least the components are loaded quickly. For data, like there is also an open PR to work on parallel data fetching, because waterfalls are also still a thing, but that's an improvement that will come. And also Eduardo who's working on the Vue router and on Pina is working on data loaders in Vue to also make sure that data can be fetched the earliest possible and also be combined. It doesn't have to be refetched if not necessary, and so on and so on. And of course, we also have a Vue query, so the TAN stack is with us there.
So if I have a Vue application and I'm using single file components and I use the composition API, so I have the setup function, is that the right place to fetch data?
Yes. Yeah.
Okay.
The thing is also there, like so you can make it async to just say like await. With the script setup center, it's just like top level awaited there. And then your component will become async and you need suspense to handle it. The good thing is with Nuxt, you already do that under the hood, so it's fine. You can just do it. With Vue, it's a bit more effort to do it, but you also don't necessarily need to. It depends. Like if you use server-side rendering, for example, you want to because you want to wait it on the server. If you have a plain old SPA, which you can also build with Nuxt, by the way, so nobody stops you from just saying no SSR, no SSG. You know what? Just like one single indexed HTML file, the JavaScript, and you're good. Because I heard other meta frameworks have an issue with that.
Which ones?
Yeah, who knows? I also researched that for my thesis. It was interesting. The different rendering modes, also the defaults. So you can do that, and then you can even say you use a composable and say, okay, I have my data. Let's say const. You can destructure it, so const in square brackets data equals use fetch from Nuxt, for example, but also there's other options like Vue use, which is basically a collection of composables, like a collection of React hooks in Vue, and said, okay, use fetch, I get my data as soon as the request is done. So I can show a placeholder when the state is different or when data is empty. They also have, of course, states like is pending or whatever, and said, okay, I show a little loading spinner, and when it's done, I get my data. And because everything is reactive, then data will change in the template. If you have like a VF data or VF pending, VLs, it will update, and you can also act on the data with computer properties or other components, pass it in, and continue. So
and you can also then, since it's a VF, you can, do I understand correctly, you can lazy load the component that needs the data when oh my gosh.
Absolutely correct.
That's so cool.
So yeah, lots of things that people don't have to worry about. And you also mentioned before, like, okay, infinite loops because you forgot to add a dependency or something with use effect with the second arc. I never ran into infinite loops in Vue. Like never ever. I mean, it will be really hard to do just because the API is very smooth in that way. Like you don't have to define explicitly. The compiler will help a lot, right? So yeah, and also the reactivity system in general.
That's so great. All right, let's start wrapping up. I want to get from you your thoughts on the future of web development, maybe Vue, maybe Nuxt, maybe broad, just like the whole ecosystem, and your best advice for developers in this space.
Yeah, so let's maybe go from small to big. Let's say Vue, not small as in like audience or whatever, just like the component level framework, meta level framework, everything. I think Vue will still be relevant throughout the years. I think people starting with Vue now just because they feel like, hey, okay, that sounds good, it works for me, that will be fine. Especially also switching from Vue to another framework is easy right now. It will be even easier because, and that's a little foreshadowing, frameworks will converge more and more. So I think also Vue will have a good stance. The only thing that you already mentioned, like the exposure, just because it's so easy, smooth, is a bit lower, but I think that's fine. Maybe one day we get also another drama video or something, but I'm happy that we don't have any, except the options API and composition API topic. But yeah, that's just one tiny thing.
Yeah.
So with meta framework, I think Nuxt will evolve further and further. Like I know what is on the roadmap for certain things. Like we, for example, also want to look into streaming. We want to look at lots of improvements, and of course, we try to have the best developer experience out there, but also, of course, amazing performance. So that you don't only build apps you like to build, but also that your users like to use, because they're fast, they're snappy, and they work well. So I also think that will be a continuing thing. Same, I think, for any other meta framework out there, and also like. There will be so many, like there's so many legacy applications. We don't build our applications like every year new, not necessarily like our personal websites. It's not like, oh yeah, let's rebuild our big e-commerce store. We took 2 years once again in a new technology, because why? Yeah. I think for the broader world, once again, I think frameworks will converge more and more. So it's like even the meta frameworks with Nitro, for example, it's a good point as well. And that will make things easier. Also, innovation will spread as well. Like we've seen it back in time with like turbolinks and Gatsby. With like, oh yeah, you hover over link, we will preload the JavaScript. Now I think every big framework has that, Nuxt included, of course, if you want to use it. And all these things, like it's very influenced. I'm very curious how AI will add to the whole thing, because I think it can be a really good tool to help building. It can improve the velocity, but also the code that AI generates sometimes. And like, if people just push accept instead of reviewing that, I'm not sure if that will help that much. So that will be different and interesting space to watch. But in general, we also see less JavaScript frameworks popping up right now, right? Like, okay, we have Quick and Solid, but Solid wasn't work for so long, like 2016 or something, I think. It's not like this is, oh yeah, it came out a year ago or something. Like this was long work. Yeah. So I also think we have kind of a set of frameworks set right now. And these will influence each other, and then we'll see how things evolve. But I hope that web development will get less complex, because it was never as easy as now to get started with web dev, but also never as complex as it is right now. So I hope that will change.
You mentioned interest in seeing how AI will shape things, and as you said this, I got this really great idea of. You mentioned the Nuxt dev tools will already give you like accessibility hints in the dev.
It will in the future, not right now. That will come. Same with performance. That's work in progress.
I feel like this is perfect for a small AI integration, especially using the inbuilt browser Gemma models, where it doesn't just show you like, hey, there's not enough contrast here, but there's not enough contrast here. By the way, I fixed it in your code if you want to accept it in this specific component. How cool. So then you just like click accept where the contrast is bad, or where the font size is too small, or where the network is too long.
I would even say this you can even do without AI, because like we have all the access and the dev tools even to the components and stuff. So even there, like that could work pretty well. And with less hallucination. But I see your point, like this, for just as an example, for that kind of categories, I'm like, okay, run a bit of analysis, like, okay, try it out. What do you think? Oh, here, this can be improved, or there's duplication, or not semantic HTML, or something like that. Yeah, definitely. That's worth trying.
When that happens, and I say when, not if, this will be another one of those moments where my mind is totally blown by the Nuxt or Vue DX. Listen, Alex, it's been such an incredible pleasure. I've learned so much, even just this config directory thing, but by and large, like Vue single file components, the composition API versus the component or the, what was the other API?
Options API, yeah.
The option, the one that we don't like because of the limitations, and how Vue stays relevant and all of it. On behalf of myself and all the listeners, thanks so much for sharing all of this with me. I feel like your passion is indeed contagious now, and I want to go build something with you. So thank you so much.
Perfect. Yeah, you're welcome. Also, if there are any more questions, just shoot them at me. Send me a DM on Twitter, aka X, or write a comment on YouTube, or a comment on the Nuxt Discord and chat. So always available there. And Tejas, if you want to do something with you and have any questions or want to do a live stream, hit me up.
Thank you. Thank you so much.
Of course.
Thank you for joining my discussion with Alexander Lichter. I hope you enjoyed it as much as I did, and I hope you got to know Vue.js and Nuxt like you never have before. I hope you appreciate the nuance that goes into developing such a thing, and I hope you try it. If you do try it, let us know on the socials how it goes, and also let Alex and the team know as well. If you're learning from and or enjoying this content, I hope you're enjoying this content, then a great way to support it is to subscribe on YouTube, leave a like and comment on the video with topics you want me to cover, guests you want me to have. If you're listening on Apple or Spotify, then if you can leave up to a 5-star review, and I do mean up to, like if you don't like it, let me know. That would also be helpful because it just helps the algorithm like recognize where to put it. Thanks for sticking around. Thank you for being a part of this podcast. And most importantly, thank you for your interest in engineering.